My name is Eleanor Grace Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. For 47 of those years, I was a wife, a mother, and the quiet, steady soul behind Hazelbrook Orchards, a modest organic apple farm tucked into the soft, green hills of central Pennsylvania. My hands, now curled by arthritis, still remember the rhythm of bread rising in the dawn, the weight of apple crates, and the ache of pruning branches alongside my husband, Richard. Our days began early. Before the sun, before the world rushed in, we built a life from soil and sweat, from love. 3 weeks ago, I buried him. Richard and I married in 1981. We built this orchard with nothing but borrowed tools, love-worn hands, and big dreams. He believed in roots, not just the ones in the ground, but in people, in purpose. We didn't just grow apples, we grew a legacy. A place for our children to always return to. Or so I thought. The morning after his funeral, the house was too quiet. There was no soft rustle of him dressing, no kettle whistling on the stove, no humming from the back porch as he checked the weather. I sat at our worn kitchen table, the same one we'd bought second-hand as newlyweds, something, with chilling clarity. Maybe what we built together wasn't enough to hold our children. Richard died of pancreatic cancer. 14 months. That's how long it took the strongest man I'd ever known to become a shadow. He didn't want the children to know. Let them live a little longer in peace, he'd whispered, morphine thick in his voice, his hand trembling in mine. And because I loved him, truly loved him, I honored that wish. But I already knew. Our children, Darren and Samantha, had been drifting for years. Darren, our eldest, found his identity in concrete and glass towers, chasing numbers. In Boston's financial district, his visits were rare, efficient, more business trip than homecoming. Samantha was the opposite, spiritual, rootless, constantly shifting between wellness ventures that never quite took off. She always needed help, money, advice, more time. Richard always gave it. I never said no. I believed, maybe naively, death would soften the spaces between us. That grief would remind them of who we were, who we had been. I imagined them walking the orchard again, remembering the dinners, the laughter, the warmth of a simpler world. But when they arrived for the funeral, I didn't see mourning in their eyes. I saw calculation. The night after we laid Richard to rest, I sat alone in the kitchen. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the wind brushing against the windows. I told Darren and Samantha we could go through Richard's things together the next morning. A ritual. A way to make space for memory, a way to keep love alive in the middle of loss. But they had other plans. Morning sunlight spilled into the kitchen, like it always had, soft and golden through the lace curtains Richard and I picked out decades ago. I brewed coffee the way he liked it, strong, simple, from our old tin canister. Darren didn't even glance at the pot. He brought his own some designer roast from a boutique roastery in Boston. Samantha, too, seemed untouched by the quiet sanctity of the house. Her silk blouse shimmered under the farmhouse lighting. Her perfume, too sharp for these old walls. They sat down across from me at the table. Darren was in a blazer, his posture as crisp as his shirt. Samantha's smile was tight, performative. "Mom," Darren began, placing his imported mug down with a clink, "we've been talking." The words carried the chill of rehearsed strategy. Samantha glanced at him, then at me. "We think it's time to start settling things. The estate, the orchard, the house." Settling. The word hit me like a slap. "It's practical," Darren added smoothly. "You can't manage all this alone. Not at your age." There it was, my age, as though the years I spent waking at 4 a.m. to water saplings, balance ledgers, make deliveries, bake pies, teach Sunday school, and manage the books didn't mean anything anymore. As if the lines on my hands and the strength in my back had expired with Richard. "We want you to be comfortable," Samantha said, tone sweet and soft as syrup. "There's this wonderful community down South Sunnyvale Estates, activities, people your age, beautiful views." I stood up, slowly. My hands trembled. I moved to clear the plates, not out of obligation, but to hide my shaking. Then Darren reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Dad spoke to me about this last year," he said, sliding the folder across the table. "He wanted Melissa and me to take over, said it was time." I looked at the papers. Darren's corporate letterhead was at the top. The signature at the bottom. Richard's name, bold and clean. Too clean, too perfect. I'd watched him struggle to hold a pen during those last months. I'd held the pen with him more than once. "This isn't from our family lawyer," I said softly. He was lucid. Darren insisted. He signed it. He wanted this. "There's a developer involved," Samantha added quickly. $7 million for the land. We'd be set. You'd be cared for. 7 million concrete roads, coal-d-sacks. They weren't just selling the orchard, they were selling his legacy. My life, our home. "You're talking about bulldozing your father's life's work," I whispered. "Mum, be reasonable, Darren," said. "The orchard isn't sustainable anymore." That's when something inside me cracked, not from heartbreak, but from resolve. A slow-burning heat began to rise. A steady defiance I hadn't touched since I once ran across a frost-covered field to chase off a fox circling our chicken coop. I looked at both of them, quiet but sure. "Show me the will," I said. Darren paused, then pushed the folder forward. Again, I didn't touch it. "I'm going to bed," I said. "We'll talk in the morning." But inside, I already knew there would be no talking. Not tomorrow, not ever again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in our bed, not just mine, staring at the ceiling, tracing every crack in the plaster as if it held the answers. The house creaked with its usual rhythm. The wind rustled through the trees outside, and every sound reminded me of the life we had poured into this land. But it wasn't the house that kept me awake. It was the silence in my children's hearts. They didn't come here to grieve. They came to close a deal. When morning arrived, the air was cold and bright, and the house felt emptier than it had even the day Richard died. The smell of coffee greeted me, not the kind I used to make, warm and nutty. This one was bitter, acidic, expensive, Darren's brand, imported arrogance in a mug. I took my time coming down the stairs. My knees ached not from age, but from the weight of betrayal. When I entered the kitchen, they were already waiting. Coats on, bags packed. The suitcase at the door wasn't mine. "We packed some essentials," Samantha said brightly, too brightly. "Thought we could take a drive to Sunnyvale today. Just to look. You don't have to decide." I walked past them, poured myself a cup of my own coffee, let the silence grow. "I'm not going to a retirement community," I said. Darren checked his watch. "Mom, be reasonable. The paperwork is done. We close next week." "You can't stay here, Mom," Samantha added. "It's just too much." "I've lived here my whole life," I said, my voice steady. "This is my home. It's all of ours now," Darren replied, flat and final. "Dad left the business to us. It's time you let go." Let go, as if my life were a branch to be snapped off when no longer convenient. "I need to get my medication," I said, standing. "And I'd like to grab a few family photos." Samantha nodded, relieved. "Take whatever personal items you want. We'll ship the rest." They thought they'd won. I moved slowly up the stairs. past the portraits on the wall our wedding day, the kids in overalls under apple trees, Richard with his hands stained from harvest. In the bathroom. I opened the mirrored cabinet, hidden behind the aspirin bottles and arthritis cream. Behind a false panel Richard installed back in the 80s during a burglary scare was a fireproof envelope. Inside, my passport, my birth certificate, a few hundred in cash, and the original deed to 20 acres of land we had quietly purchased in my maiden name before the orchard even began to bloom. Not many people knew about it. Not even the children. Richard called it our if all else fails safety net. Now, it was my shield. In our closet. I reached behind Richard's old flannels and took down a small metal lockbox. It held years of tax records, handwritten agreements, and notarized land use permits. More importantly, held leverage. When I came downstairs again, my purse was heavier, but my soul lighter. Ready? Darren asked, keys in hand. Sure, I said, letting Samantha take my arm, letting them believe I was small, weak, finished. We drove through Hazelbrook, past the orchards beginning to blush with spring, past the church where I sang in the choir, the elementary school where I volunteered, the hardware store where Richard used to barter apples for tools. But Darren didn't take the highway toward Sunnyvale. He took a remote gravel road, unfamiliar, winding. 20 minutes later, he pulled onto a dirt shoulder beside an open, empty field. The wind stirred the grass. No houses, no town. This is where you get off, Mom, Darren said, like he was announcing a bus stop. Samantha turned sharply toward him. Darren, what? She contest the will. She make it complicated. This is cleaner. He looked at me, detached. You have your medication, some clothes. There's a gas station 5 miles up. You'll figure it out. He opened the door, and just like that, they left me. I stood on the side of that gravel road, holding a suitcase I didn't pack. In shoes not meant for walking, my coat flapping in the wind. The car disappeared in a plume of dust, their taillights vanishing like they'd erased me. But I wasn't afraid. I wasn't broken. I was free. I turned not toward the gas station Darren had so generously suggested, but toward town, toward Hazelbrook. My next move, the gravel bit at my feet. The sun pressed against my back, and still I walked. One step, then another. The air smelled like earth and apples, and the silence around me wasn't empty. It was pregnant with decision. With every blister that bloomed. I remembered who I was. After nearly 2 hours, I reached the edge of town, blistered, dusty, and determined. Miller's Gas and Grocery stood like a relic of a better time, weathered, sun-bleached, and steady. A bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside. Just like it had for 30 years. Ray Miller stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, eyes widening, you all right? You look a little pale. Just resting, Ray, I said. Been a long morning. He looked at the suitcase beside me and frowned, kindly. I'm real sorry about Richard. He was a good man. I nodded. Yes, he was. He hesitated. Do you need to use the phone? If it's not too much trouble, of course. He led me past aisles of canned goods and penny candy to a tiny office in the back. I picked up the landline, dialed from memory. 1 ring. Then 2. Jennings Law, answered a warm voice. This is Harold. It's Eleanor, I said. A pause. Then, Naomi, I've been trying to reach you. You missed the will reading. My heart tightened. What reading? Darren submitted a will. But I had concerns. The signature didn't match the file your husband and I updated last year. I need your help, I said, and your discretion. You have both. My office, 1 hour. I hung up, Ray returned with a bottle of water. You need anything else? Do you sell prepaid phones? He nodded. We got a few behind the counter. Want one? Yes, and thank you. He refused to take my money. On the house, Mrs. Whitmore. You just say the word. His kindness nearly undid me, but I didn't cry when I buried Richard, and I wouldn't cry now. I had work to do, and I wasn't done yet. Harold Jennings' office hadn't changed in 30 years. A creaky second-floor walk-up in an old Victorian house on Main Street, right across from the library. The kind of building with too much personality and not enough insulation. The stairs groaned beneath my feet as I climbed them. Every step a reminder that age may slow you, but it doesn't stop you. His secretary, Helen, looked up the moment I walked in. Mrs. Whitmore, she whispered, like she was afraid to disturb something sacred. Mr. Jennings is expecting you. Can I get you some tea? A glass of water? I'm fine, thank you, I replied. With a tight smile, she motioned to the door. He's waiting. Harold rose from his chair the moment I stepped inside. He hadn't aged much, maybe a little more stooped at the shoulders. A bit more silver in his beard, but his eyes were still sharp as the day he filed our marriage certificate. Naomi, he said, not with pity, but with the steadiness of someone ready to fight beside you. He didn't point me to the desk. Instead, he led me to the two worn leather chairs near the window. The light was soft, filtered through lace curtains, like the ones in my own kitchen. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told him about Richard, about the morphine, about the whisper in the dark that had held more love than any legal document, about the children, Darren in his tailored suit, Samantha with her curated grief, about the kitchen meeting that felt more like a boardroom ambush, about the developer, about the ride, and finally, about the gravel road and the suitcase they packed for me like I was cargo to be relocated. Harold didn't interrupt. He listened, eyebrows furrowed, a silent storm brewing behind his glasses. When I was done, I reached into my purse and placed the fireproof envelope in his hands. Inside was the deed, the original deed. 20 acres of prime land, with the only natural water source on the property purchased before my marriage, in my maiden name. He unfolded the parchment slowly, reverently, like a priest handling scripture. This, he breathed, Naomi, this isn't just property, this is power. They can't develop a single inch of that orchard without this. I know, and they don't know it exists. Not a clue. He leaned back, running a hand through his thinning hair. The will Darren submitted it didn't feel right. The signature was too smooth, too confident for someone on hospice-grade morphine. I had suspicions, but without evidence, now we have it. I said, calm and clear. Yes, we do, he said. Then he stood, the weight of justice suddenly lifting his shoulders. I'll file an injunction today. Emergency motion. That'll freeze the sale immediately. What about the developer? They'll panic. No one wants to touch a property under dispute, especially not one missing water rights. What do I do in the meantime? I asked. Live, breathe, reclaim your space. I didn't return to the farmhouse. Not yet. Instead, I rented a modest apartment above the bakery on Main Street. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, and a balcony just large enough for a rocking chair and a pot of basil. The air always smelled like cinnamon and rising dough. It wasn't home, not the kind Richard and I built, but it was safe. And for now, that was enough. By noon the next day, Harold had delivered the legal notice to the developer's offices via courier. Before sunset, the deal was suspended. Papers were withdrawn. Phones started ringing. That evening, my prepaid phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A message from Samantha. Mom, please call. We didn't know about the other land. Darren's freaking out. Can we fix this? Fix this. No apology. No remorse. Just fear now that the money was bleeding through their fingers. I didn't reply. An hour later, Harold called to say Darren had phoned his office, directly, angry, loud, grasping for control. I told him all communication must go through legal channels, Harold said with a smile in his voice. He's not used to being told no. They thought I had nothing left. I said quietly, but you had everything they forgot to value. He replied. In the days that followed, Hazelbrook hummed on. The postman still whistled off-key. Kids rode their bikes down Main Street. The librarian still tucked tiny paper hearts into books about farming and folklore. Life didn't pause for betrayal. It moved gently around it, like a stream around a stone. I started walking every morning past the orchard, past the little church, past the rows of blooming apple trees Richard had once planted with his own hands. The air carried the sweet promise of spring. One morning, I paused outside the orchard gates. The land stood untouched, still breathing, still mine. Later that week, I returned to Harold's office. He had filed a formal challenge against the forged will and began proceedings to restore the estate according to the original version, one that left the orchard in trust, not as a quick sale. I've also contacted the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative, I told him. I want to donate the water rights to the town's farming trust. Let the young farmers use the land the way it was meant to be used. Harold looked at me with something like admiration. You could have fought for full control. I'm not here to rule, I said. I'm here to protect. That same evening, I hosted a workshop at the town library, my first in years. Quilting, just like the old days. 12 women showed up, half of them younger than Samantha, none of them knowing the fire still burning in my chest. We stitched, in silence, then in laughter. And for the first time since Richard passed, I felt whole again. Not because I had won, but because I had remembered who I was. It was a strange thing, this new life. Quieter, slower, but also fuller in ways I never expected. I didn't have the old farmhouse, the orchard under my roof, or Richard's strong hands folding mine in the kitchen. But what I did have was choice and peace, and something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. I started teaching again. Nothing formal. No chalkboards or grades. Just Saturday mornings at the Hazelbrook Community Center. Gardening, sustainable fruit farming, preserving the land, lessons I had learned with dirt under my nails and sunburn on my shoulders. Teenagers came with curiosity. Young couples came with notebooks and dreams of land. Even retirees wandered in, their minds still fertile for learning. I showed them how to test soil pH without gadgets, how to spot the difference between healthy roots and root rot. I told them about the bees, the frost, the seasons. I told them the truth, that land listens. And if you take care of it, it remembers. They listened, not because I was loud, but because I spoke like the orchard still lived in me. And in a way did the land we'd fought for. It remained untouched. The developer backed out quietly, like a thief spooked in the night. Their lawyers issued polite withdrawal notices. Darren and Samantha's silence stretched longer by the day. No texts, no calls. Only a legal standoff and a wall of regret too wide to scale. Harold kept me updated with a calm professionalism. The forged will had been formally contested. With my documentation and the original estate plans Richard and I had drawn up years before, their claim was unraveling stitch by stitch. And one spring morning, I stood on my balcony, watching the town stretch awake with the sun. When Harold called, "It's done," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. the court accepted your evidence. The forged will is void. Full control of the remaining estate reverts to the last legitimate document, the one you and Richard filed in 2019. And the orchard, yours. Legally, publicly, permanently. I closed my eyes, letting the morning breeze brush against my face. There were no cheers, no fireworks, just the sound of pigeons flapping toward the bakery roof and the quiet click of the world settling back into place. That same week, I walked past Hazelbrook Orchards for the first time without feeling pain. The apple blossoms were early this year, soft, white and blush pink against rich green. The trees bent slightly under their own weight, like old farmers bowing to time. I reached the old gate and placed a hand on the post. The wood still carried Richard's scent, cedar oil and earth. I leaned in and whispered to the wind, "We did it." And in the soft rustle of leaves, I could almost hear him reply. It was about a month later when Samantha came. She didn't call first, didn't knock at the bakery apartment. I found her waiting on the steps one evening, sitting like a child who had nowhere else to go. Her makeup was lighter this time, her clothes less curated, and when she stood, I saw it. The fear behind the mask, the understanding that something had broken and, not in me, but in her. "Hi, Mum," she said softly. "I waited. I didn't come for money," she added quickly, "or to argue. I just—" She looked down at her hands. They trembled. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. Just opened the door and let her inside. We sat in silence for a while. I poured her a glass of water and we listened to the town settle outside. The bakery downstairs had closed for the night. The last loaves were cooling. The streetlights buzzed like distant crickets. "I don't know when I became that person," she whispered. "The kind who thought selling our father's land was okay." I kept telling myself it was practical, smart, but it wasn't. It was greedy, and lazy, and cruel. Still, I didn't speak. Not yet. She looked up at me, tears now sliding down her cheeks. "You always loved us. Even when we didn't deserve it." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "Love isn't permission, Samantha. It's presence, and it doesn't erase consequence." "I know," she said. "I needed you and Darren after your father passed, not to handle logistics, but to be here, to hold space. Instead, you treated me like a loose end." "I know," she whispered again, and for the first time, I believed she did. Later that night, as she left, she turned back at the door. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight, but I hope you know I'm trying. Trying is a start," I said gently, and then she was gone. Darren never came, not in person. But he did send a letter, formal, typed, polite, apologetic in a way that felt drafted by lawyers. I didn't reply. Some wounds aren't stitched with words. They need time, distance, and sometimes silence is the clearest form of truth. But I didn't carry bitterness, only boundaries. I had lived too long with kindness in my bones to grow thorns now. But I had also lived too long to be uprooted. Again. In the following weeks, I finalized the deed transfer to the Hazelbrook Agricultural Cooperative. The 20 acres with water rights would now belong to the community, held in trust, untouchable by developers, dedicated to real farmers. Teenagers with dreams. Families with dirt under their nails. Old men still planting seeds in the fall, knowing they may never see them bloom, but trusting someone else would. The orchard would live on, not just as memory, but as future. The news traveled slowly, as it always does in small towns. People whispered first at the bakery, then at the gas station. Hazelbrook Orchards wouldn't be sold. The land wasn't being leveled. An old Mrs. Whitmore, the widow with silver hair and a spine of steel, had stood her ground. They came by in 2s and 3s, not to ask, but to say thank you. Some brought muffins, others bouquets of wildflowers from their gardens. One man left a bag of freshly caught trout on my doorstep with a simple note, "For the woman who saved the soil." I never saw myself as a hero. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek revenge. I just refused to let my life be erased. And maybe that's the most radical thing a woman like me can do. Because here's the truth. No one tells you betrayal doesn't always come with warning signs. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives dressed in family, speaking softly, with coffee in hand and paperwork in the other. Sometimes it looks like your children. And yet, the older I get, the more I realize this too. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly into a lawyer's office with an old deed in a worn purse and says, "No, not like this." Spring melted into summer. The orchard bloomed fuller than it had in years. The trees seemed to lean into the sun with extra vigor, as if they too had survived something unspeakable. Every time I walked past them, I thought of Richard. Not with sorrow, but with pride. I talked to him, sometimes soft words carried on wind. I told him about the workshops, the cooperative, about the kids learning how to plant properly. Not just for profit, but for harmony. He would have liked that. One evening, I sat on my little balcony with a cup of mint tea and watched the town below settle into twilight. A couple pushed a stroller. A boy balanced a guitar on his back. The bakery lights flickered off. Life moved on, and I let it. For a long time, my identity had been tied to the land, the house, the family I built. But now I knew something more sacred. Identity isn't what you lose or keep. It's what you stand for when everything else is stripped away. Then came the letter, handwritten, from Samantha, no legal tone. No pretenses, it read, "Dear Mom, there isn't a day that goes by I don't think about what we did. Not just the sale, but the abandonment. I see it now not as efficiency, but cruelty disguised as logic. Darren still won't talk about it, but I've started therapy. I'm unlearning a lot of things, especially how we measure success. You gave us love, work ethic, legacy, and we gave you paperwork and suitcases. If you're open to it, I'd like to visit, not to fix, not to ask, just to sit with you. Love always, Samantha." I folded the letter and placed it beside Richard's photograph on my shelf. I didn't know yet if I was ready, but I was grateful she was trying again, not to inherit, not to control, but simply to be present. Sometimes that's enough. In August, I was invited to speak at the county farming fair. Just a short talk on heritage and land preservation. I stood on the makeshift stage, microphone in hand, looking out at a sea of worn hats and weathered faces. Farmers, dreamers, skeptics. I said, "My husband and I built a life out of soil. We raised children and apple trees in the same breath. We believed in the old ways not because we feared change, but because we respected rhythm. Nature's rhythm. A season for sowing, a season for harvest, a season for rest." I paused. And sometimes you live long enough to see the ones you raised forget the value of what you gave them. But if you're lucky, you also live long enough to remind them, not through anger, but through unwavering presence. I stepped down to quiet applause. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, but someone whispered, "That woman, she's Hazelbrook." And I thought, maybe I am Dot. If you're hearing this, maybe you've been underestimated too. Maybe your story includes betrayal. Maybe the people you loved most left you standing on the side of the road with nothing but a suitcase and a memory. Let me tell you something. You are not broken. You are not irrelevant. You are not too old to rise again. You are the keeper of your own soil, your own legacy, your own truth, and no one, no matter how familiar, gets to decide that for you, not without your consent. Hazelbrook Orchards still stands, and so do I. The house remains empty for now. It's too large for me. But I pass it sometimes on evening walks, and I leave small things by the gate: a fresh pie, a clipping of herbs, a child's drawing from the community center. I don't know if I'll ever live there again, but I know this: its roots are safe, its story is intact, its spirit is not for sale, and neither am I. So to all the women out there, mothers, wives, widows, who have been cast aside, overlooked, or quietly displaced by those they raised, let them underestimate you, let them assume your silence is surrender. And then let your next move remind them you are the storm they never saw coming.